Helo a chroeso I Spotlight Wales.
Hello and welcome to Spotlight Wales for this special report into the future of news in Wales. I'm Jonathan Davis.
And I'm Emma Edwards. And with us in the studio today we have Martin Shipton, Chair of the Cardiff and South East Wales branch of the National Union of Journalists. Martin, welcome.
Hiya.
We'll also be hearing from Jonathan Hill, ITV Wales news presenter, and Alistair McGhie, assistant news editor at BBC Radio Wales, who we spoke to earlier.
But first, here's Emma with the media news in Wales.
Media Wales is up for 7 different awards at this year's Society of Editors Regional Press Awards. Wales Online has been shortlisted for Website of the Year, while its data store is up for the Digital Award. Wales on Sunday newspaper has been shortlisted for Daily and Sunday Newspaper of the Year. And the Western Mail's front page, paying tribute to Welsh rugby legend Mervyn Davies, has been nominated for Front Page of the Year. Martin Shipton, who we have with us here, has been shortlisted for the Daily and Sunday Reporter of the Year award, and there are individual nominations for designer Mark White and columnist Carolyn Hitt. Also, Town and Country Broadcasting's Rugby Nation has been nominated for Best Sports Programme in the Sony Radio Academy Awards. Rugby Nation broadcasts on Nation Radio, Radio Pembrokeshire, Radio Carmarthenshire, Bridge FM and Nation Hits. And finally, Cerys Matthews has received a nomination for her radio programme, Cerys on 6 for BBC 6 Music. And that's the latest media news in Wales. Now to our main topic.
Yes, the state and future of media in Wales has been a big talking point over the last few years. In May last year, a report into that very topic was submitted to the Welsh Government. The BBC have faced cuts, there have been job losses at Media Wales, who produce the South Wales Echo, Western Mail, Mail on Sunday and other local papers. And there has been a drop in Welsh news on commercial radio stations due to rebrands. But it's not all bad news. ITV have invested in Wales, and it was announced in February that it would create a separate Wales licence, meaning ITV will broadcast ITV Wales rather than ITV Wales and West.
With so many companies facing cuts, we asked Alistair McGhie and Jonathan Hill about the finances at the BBC and ITV respectively.
There are, kind of cutbacks that are continually being looked at. I think, what we kind of hopefully are doing is kind of keeping the output at, the same level. In fact, hopefully enhancing it and making it better and better. But, multi-skill is a phrase that, we're really have become used to for a while now and continue to be because, we realise that technology allows us to do things that means that, where some jobs kind of in the past kind of may have taken more than one person, multi-skilling can help that happen.
And the ITV invests millions and millions of pounds every year in a high-quality news service that's available both in broadcast and online. It's a commercial company, it has to make money, and in very difficult, commercial circumstances, it's investing and has been investing for the last 40, 50 years in news, high-quality news in Wales. The BBC, of course, gets a licence fee. It doesn't have to raise any money. It gets a very generous licence fee. And it's important that we have a second voice to the BBC. I think the BBC would say that as well. One voice in journalism is never a good thing. You always want to have an alternative voice, and that's what ITV provides, really, and is the only organisation that's providing any real alternative to the BBC.
Martin, we heard Jonathan Hill talking about investing, whereas Alistair McGhie was talking more about trying to produce the same or better content with less staff. There were cutbacks at Media Wales as well recently. Tell us about those and the impact that it had on the output.
Well, the difficulty that all newspaper companies are facing is downturn in revenues. Fewer people are buying regional newspapers. The Western Mail and the South Wales Echo is regarded as regional newspapers. My view is, and the view of a lot of people in the NUJ, is that a very serious mistake was made when they decided to put effectively the entire content of their newspapers free online. Because newspapers have traditionally relied on 2 sources of revenue. One, advertising, but secondly, and it's been very important, is the revenue they get from selling their newspapers. Now, the difficulty is that because these days people have an expectation. People have been conditioned to expect to get information free of charge. And so, therefore, a decision was made several years ago by most newspaper companies to put their entire news content free online, and that has just exacerbated the problems of the newspaper industry. And because revenues have gone down, the only way that they can keep afloat is by making constant cuts in their workforce, and that's what we've been subjected to for the last 10 years. So over that 10-year period, we've had, I think, 8 rounds of redundancy. And every time there is a round of redundancy, it means that there are fewer people left to do the work. Now, sometimes the job losses are not apparent to the reader because they will be cuts that have been made in production staff, for example, and they have gone in some cases, and the people who remain have had to refine their working practices in order to keep bringing the papers out. But there have been serious inroads to the ability of the newspapers to cover news. Most apparent, I think that's been in our weekly newspapers, where there used to be a successful group of weekly newspapers circulating in the South Wales valleys, which were reasonably well staffed, and they were really packed full of local content. And what's happened over the last couple of years is that district offices have been shut down. We now have a situation where these newspapers effectively have one reporter each, which makes it incredibly difficult to provide the sort of news service that people expect. And a lot of the content is shared between the various newspapers across titles. So you will have a situation where people living in Pontypridd will be reading more news about Merthyr Tydfil, and with very local newspapers like that, they're not particularly interested in news from Merthyr Tydfil. They want local news on their doorstep, so that is quite a big problem. With this latest round of cuts, we are now seeing the introduction of material that is produced at a central location, Liverpool, for all the Trinity Mirror regional titles, which are published in many parts of Britain, from Scotland down through Newcastle, Middlesbrough, to places like Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Cardiff, and North Wales as well. And a lot of feature content, what we call soft feature content, lifestyle type stuff, together with celebrity interviews, are now being produced instead of in Cardiff by this central unit. And I think that that is regrettable because it dilutes the local content. What the editor who was responsible for deciding where the cut should come had very much in his mind was the need to maintain the core newsroom as much as possible. So he's tried to protect the core newsroom for the core news service, but that's meant that that other people have had to go, and it's very regrettable. But sadly, if these cuts were not made, we would now be in a loss-making position, and Trinity Mirror has made it absolutely clear that they're not prepared to tolerate any loss-making titles, and they would just shut the operation down.
Yeah, one thing that Jonathan Hill mentioned was the need for an alternative to the BBC. By nationalising all the content in the feature department at Trinity Mirror, is there going to be a case where there's not an alternative in the feature department?
Well, that may be the case in the features department. What actually happened is slightly more complicated than that, in that some of the people who were working in the features department have now been given jobs where they are news feature writers, and they will be reporting to the news desk. So there won't be a separate features department, but some of the people who are working in it are continuing to work for us and will be continuing to create Wales-oriented copy, which is a very good thing. I mean, at the moment, I think we continue to provide a very good alternative service to the BBC. The BBC has to be bound by the Broadcasting Act, which means that it has to be politically neutral, and that sometimes lends itself to some anodyne content, I would argue, whereas we are able to bring a bit of attitude to our copy and create what is a genuine alternative to the BBC and provide people with more news about things that they wouldn't read about in the BBC. I mean, for example, today we have as a front page story a story about a Labour Party official who made what most people regard as quite an offensive comment about Tony Blair sharing Margaret Thatcher's coffin at the funeral next Wednesday. And we've run that story, and it's actually in the Daily Mail today. I mean, it's in Mail Online today, but the BBC hasn't touched it because they probably regard it as a bit beyond them to do it. So we think that we provide a very valuable alternative news service to the BBC, and it would be a tremendous shame if the Western Mail were no longer around.
Okay, let's move on to target audiences a bit. Target audiences are obviously something that any organisation needs to have in order to survive, let alone media or news organisations. Let's hear from Jonathan and Alistair about how they hit their target audiences.
We like to think that we're in touch with our viewers, that we talk to them and not at them. We're always listening to feedback. The audience can get in touch with us. They can email us. They can text us. They can follow us on Facebook. They can tweet us. All those things, and we listen to what they're saying. We also carry out research with focus groups as well to see what the audience like, what they don't like, and we change it and we listen to them. If they don't like this, we make sure we change it. ITV News has a long, proud history, which helps us inform what we do, but we're also looking to the future as well and where television news is evolving. So new technologies are constantly coming in, constantly. It's an expensive business. You have to constantly update your technologies. We can send stuff via the internet from anywhere in the world. Really, if you've got a good 3G signal. I mean, I've sent stuff back via the internet while reporting in Bangkok, and it gets here in 3 or 4 minutes. Broadcast quality, whereas before that would be via satellite and booking lines and huge complications and expensive things like that. So we're able to adapt and constantly listen to our audience.
We try and make it as relevant to the people so they feel they've got an identity, because people, it was in the output this morning as well in our phone-in programme, people, feel a sense of ownership with stories like that. And if we can be saying, this is where you're going to get the Welsh take on it, be it with the miners' strike, or be it with kind of the way that the economy changed after that, or be it with the political setup. We're doing follow-up stories about how the political setup in Wales changed. So, our unique selling point is, we're here for the people of Wales, and so we've got to make that absolutely kind of central to our thinking.
So, Martin, we spoke about the cuts within the features department at Media Wales. Mm-hmm. And if you take away the content specifically produced for the target audience, is there perhaps a risk of the readers starting to buy maybe another newspaper, such as The Times or The Sun or The Mirror and so on?
I think one of the problems is facing the whole newspaper industry is that younger people are simply not buying newspapers at all, because they tend to get what news they get from websites. They're also, of course, much more in tune with social media than older people. And I was talking quite recently to some students at Cardiff University who are journalism students, and I was a bit disappointed to discover that none of them actually buy newspapers anymore. So they get their content from online. Now, I think that what is happening is that newspaper companies are desperately trying to adapt to the internet. They haven't yet really found a sustainable business model to maintain the numbers of news gatherers that they need to provide a comprehensive service. And at the moment, in a sense, we're in a race against time, because I think that it's conceivable that people will be prepared to buy electronic editions of newspapers, which can be downloaded onto an iPad, for example. But at the moment, not enough people are buying iPads or own iPads to make that a sustainable business model. And What worries me as both a journalist and also an active member of the NUJ is that I've got a great deal of concern for those people who, like me, many years ago, had an aspiration to become a journalist and to work in the industry and to get a career out of it. And the problem is that there are all these conferences that are taking place regularly about the future of the media in Wales and further afield, but a lot of these conferences have taken place already in Cardiff. The NUJ organised one a couple of years ago, and what we find is that nobody really comes up with a solution, and often, for example, something like the Port Talbot Magnet has been quoted, and that is a website that was set up a couple of years ago by a group of journalists who'd been made redundant from Swansea to try to plug a gap in the local market after my company shut down the local papers, the local weekly papers. And while they've done a lot of work and they've produced a website and they're also starting to think in terms of producing regular newspaper, they haven't actually made a great deal of money. They've made, I think, in total less than £1,000 in a couple of years, and that's for a group of individuals. Now, that cannot be sustained, so we can't survive on this pro bono journalism, which is what it amounts to, and we need to try to create sustainable business models so that journalism thrives and people know what's going on in their community and in their country.
Now, I have to say that I buy newspapers, and I personally love what you write. So
that's very kind of you. Thank you.
No, I genuinely, I do like. I choose to read about news in Cardiff rather than sort of, the UK, because I'm interested about what's going on my doorstep. So from newspapers, let's talk about social media. We'll first hear from Jonathan and Alistair, and then we'll get your take on it, Martin.
It's a great tool. It's a very useful tool for journalists to communicate with the audience. You can tweet out to people, if you're looking for examples, people, case studies, people get in touch with you. Just to trawl through it as well and see what people are saying. It's so immediate. I mean, there'll be something on Twitter. If there's a story breaking, somebody will put it out there. So it's a very useful tool. Some people really love tweeting all the time. I can't say that I do. I quite like reading other people's tweets now and again. It's quite an obsessive sort of thing, and I think that sometimes probably might overstate its value because people become just obsessed with checking it. But it is a very useful tool, and it can't be ignored.
It's transformed how we get stories, how we communicate with the people who are giving us the stories. For television as well, interactive media like that has made a big difference as well, because pictures. There are some event. There can be a breaking story, be it an explosion at kind of oil refineries in Pembrokeshire, or for instance kind of the terrible incident in Cardiff with the hit and run incident back in October last year, and images can appear very, very quickly, which is incredibly powerful, and has changed. Citizen journalism has become this much discussed kind of area, and it really has kind of revolutionised the kind of the immediacy of how quickly we can see things.
Social media has exploded into our everyday social lives, but as a tool for journalism as well. Martin, Alistair spoke about how radio and television news have used social media effectively. He didn't mention print. Is that because print doesn't use it effectively?
Well, of course, these days we are in a scenario where we are integrating print with our website. So we're constantly being told by Trinity Mirror that we have to up our game in terms of the website, and it's fair to say that a lot of money has been invested in it. The difficulty is, and the problem is, that it hasn't actually led to extra revenues to keep things going. So that is a major problem. But I have found that there have been occasions where it is useful. I remember about a month ago I was trying to get in touch with somebody, and I found that they had a Twitter account, so I tweeted them and they came back to me, and that can be a useful exercise. But I think it's also very easy to fall into the error of seeing social media as some kind of substitute for proper journalism, and it isn't. I tend to wince when I hear reference made to this term citizen journalist. And I once got into trouble on Radio Wales with some geek who was into this sort of thing when I said, well, I wouldn't like to be operated upon by a citizen surgeon, and therefore why should I take seriously what a citizen journalist says? The reality is that to be a journalist, you do need to have some training and some skills, and it isn't something that everyone can do. And the difficulty is that with all this explosion of information coming from various sources, with people tweeting and sometimes actually making some extremely factually inaccurate assertions, you need to have some kind of quality control, and it is professional journalism that provides that. And so I think that for all of the fuss about social networking, and important as it is and valuable a tool as it can be, there is no getting away from the fact that the best journalism is going to be provided by well-trained journalists who understand how to deal with people who are trying to hide information from people, because the best stories are always those which somebody in authority wants to keep the information away from the general public, and it's the role of the journalist to ferret out those stories and to bring them to public attention.
Now, you've already mentioned citizen journalism. How do radio and television news compete with it in order to stay one step ahead, in a way? Because newspapers are released the next day, obviously. And how difficult is it for newspapers to keep up? And as social media continues to grow, how difficult will it be for all formats to keep up?
Well, it's as I've said, it's extremely difficult for newspapers to keep up. A few years ago, I think newspaper companies came to the conclusion that newspapers had a limited lifespan, which is why they've invested so heavily in websites. The problem, though, is that they haven't come up with a sustainable business model to be able to employ the number of journalists they have traditionally had, and that's why so many of them have been cut. Now, I mean, looking at my own newspaper, if you plot a graph to show its circulation, the circulation is declining, and now we're down. The most recent ABC circulation figures for the second half of last year put the Western Mail down at about 23,500, which is really pretty low. Of course, you have to take into account the fact that there are about 60,000 daily visitors to the website, unique daily visitors to the website. But the problem with that is that quite a lot of those people do not actually live in Wales. They may be expatriates, they may be people who have a particular interest in a particular story which happens to be around at the moment, which may relate to some Welsh person, so they will sometimes be accidental visitors to your website. But if you're trying to sell advertising to local shops, they want to know that the people who are accessing the website are people who live in Wales and are going to be able to shop with them. So they're not really interested in expats from California. I do sometimes think that we haven't been sufficiently imaginative about how we tap into the audience that we have, though. I mean, there are a lot of things that we could do in terms of selling services. Obviously, the journalist wouldn't be involved in doing that, but I think the advertising department has not caught up with editorial in terms of the massive amounts of change that we've gone through. And one of the difficulties is that advertising department is still very much linked to a model which is now outdated and which is sadly in its death throes.
Right, so finally, we asked Jonathan and Alistair how they see the future of news in Wales.
I think the future is really, really good. Television news is expensive. It's never going to make money. But in many ways, it's a loss leader. It enriches ITV's output. It enriches ITV the main channel's output. You get all the great things like Downton Abbey, X Factor, Britain's Got Talent, all those kinds of things. But you also get award-winning, top-quality journalism in amongst that, in amongst all that. And people want to know what's going on with their world, and I don't think that's ever going to change. Now, the way it's delivered may change. Online is growing. Broadcast is still holding up, and I still think there's a place for it. I don't know what will be invented. I mean, Twitter's 7 years old today. Yesterday, at the beginning of the week. Who knows what the next great thing is, but I'm pretty sure that television news will adapt and embrace whatever change is coming. Television news is a survivor. It's a bit like when television came along, everyone predicted that radio was dead, and when radio came along, they predicted that newspapers was dead. Well, news is a pretty powerful thing, and they're still in there fighting. Broadcast is looking pretty good.
I think the future of media in Wales is secure to the extent that we know that there is output, there is content that people in Wales want. We have unique issues, we have unique selling points and unique areas of people's lives that people want to know about, be it politics or be it sport, or be it kind of individual economic kind of issues. Then it is kind of hugely important that they are broadcast. So I think that the future of media in Wales is secured in that there will always have to be that kind of public service.
So Martin, same question to you. If I say future of news in Wales, how do you see it for print and for radio and television as well?
I'm a little more pessimistic, actually, than the two other speakers, who are both obviously from the broadcast side of the profession. The BBC clearly has a very big public subsidy through the licence fee, whereas, as was pointed out, while ITV can regard news as a loss leader, they have other sources of revenue to fall back on in terms of the advertising which people will pay for when they're watching programmes like Downton Abbey, etc. Well, newspapers don't have that fallback, and newspapers live and die on the news content that they produce. And as we know, newspapers are under the cosh and are declining in circulation. So it's really a race against time to try to woo as many people as possible over the next 2 or 3 years into getting iPads, and I think that there is the intention this year to launch a proper tablet version of the Western Mail, and it's really a question of seeing whether there are sufficient takers for such a service to be able to sustain the operation that we have. But otherwise, if things continue as they are, we're just going to be faced with cut after cut, and it will be death by a thousand cuts.
So you said 2 to 3 years for the iPads. Do you think that if that doesn't happen in that period, that could be it for newspapers?
I think we are facing a potentially pretty bleak future, because obviously we're still in not a very healthy economic climate. So we've got cyclical economic downturn in the economy, linked to the structural downturn in the newspaper industry, where fewer people are buying newspapers because younger people are more interested in looking at things online. And so we're facing something of a perfect storm. And what we need to do is to be able to provide a new way of accessing our news, which will provide us with the revenue that we need to be able to sustain the kind of operation that people are used to and deserve.
Well, that's all we've got time for on this Spotlight Wales special report into the future of news in Wales. Martin, I'd like to thank you for coming in to speak to us today.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
And we'd also like to thank Jonathan Hill and Alistair McGhie for speaking to us earlier. Now, if you want to hear the full interviews with Jonathan and Alistair, you can follow us on Twitter at Wales Spotlight. So it's goodbye from Jonathan.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me. Goodbye.